Hey everybody, good Sunday evening or Monday evening if you're listening to the replay of this class on creative financing. Welcome and congratulations, because this commitment that you've made tonight is going to be the first step, or maybe you're several steps into the process, but could be the first step in a lifelong process of learning about creative finance that is going to put you head and shoulders above the typical real estate investor out there who does not know any way to buy houses other than to pay cash or to go to the bank and beg for some money. And if you look around you in the world, you will see that your most affluent colleagues are folks who are buying properties for various reasons. Sometimes they sell them, sometimes they keep them, sometimes they do something in between, but are doing it in multiple ways. Are not just offering low ball cash offers so that they can wholesale houses. Are not just going to the bank and buying rentals with 20% down and whatever the bank says the interest rate is right now. So when you see a trend like that in the world where lots of folks that are not being that successful, and they're also not implementing creative finance, and then the folks that you see that are being successful are doing it, that ought to tell you something about whether this is an important piece of your real estate investing education and practice, of course. Now, the thing is, we've got, an hour tonight before you guys turn into pumpkins. So it's not as if we're going to be able to cover the whole end-to-end spectrum of all the different things you can do with creative buying. And in fact, like I said, it's kind of a lifelong study. That doesn't mean that you have to study your whole life before you do your first deal. Very, very, very first property I ever bought, way back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, was what we would today call a subject to. It was a loan assumption, and I still own that property, and I have made tens and tens of thousands of dollars off of it over the last 25 years. And I didn't quite know what I was doing, but I had the documents and some people around me to guide me. And that was the first of many, many, many dozens, if not potentially hundreds, of creative deals that I've done since then. So you got to start somewhere. You got to start somewhere with your knowledge, and you got to start somewhere with your practice. Right? By going out and actually asking real life sellers if they will do these things with you. So the part of it that we're going to be able to get to tonight is the part that is, what is creative finance? Because there are some folks on the line who are brand new to the real estate business, and they just think it's this, I don't know, it sounds like creative bookkeeping. Is this even legal? So we'll talk a little bit about some of the things that creative finance encompasses and what it means, what it means in the sense of where does it fit in the rest of the real estate world. We're going to talk about why it's important that you know this stuff, and how it is possible for you to go ahead and pick up a rental property or a lease option property or a land contract property or even a rehab creatively, even if you're pretty new at this and even if you don't consider yourself creative. By the way, I'm offering a $1,000 bounty for anybody who comes up with a better name for this stuff than creative finance, because I think that word creative sometimes turns people away because they say, well, I'm not creative. I can't paint, I can't sculpt, I can't play the guitar, I can't write, I'm not creative, I'm not going to be able to do creative finance. Or there's that whole, creative bookkeeping connotation. But no one's come up with a better term for it so far. So if you come up with a better one, let me know. We're going to be able to go through some steps that you're going to need to learn in order to implement and how those steps cascade, because creative finance is a little different than other, if you will, if you want to call it this, strategies. And creative finance is not a single strategy, but it's a little different than something like wholesaling, where it's step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5. It's more step 1 and 2 determines what step 3 is, and once you've crossed step 3, then you go to step 4, which may bring you back to step 3 depending on what happens. And then, so it's a little, I understand why new investors sometimes hear something about creative finance and then just turn around and walk away because they're like, oh man, this is too complicated. But it really is only 6 things. It's just that those 6 things all touch each other. And that's why it seems, until you understand what they are and how they touch each other, it seems like complicated and advanced. And of course, you can make deals that are very complicated and advanced, but you can also make ones that are really simple. So we'll go through some examples, and I'll tell you how to take a very cheap and easy next step toward really building your creative finance knowledge. And in fact, I'll just get that out of the way right now. Cincinnati RIA is having an all-day workshop on July the 30th that I'm going to be teaching. It's a 9 to 5 deal, so even if you're coming from Indianapolis or Toledo or something, you can still drive in that morning. Although Toledo, I guess you'd have to get up really early in the morning, and we'll get you out of there by 5. It's gonna give me time to flesh out detail that I don't really have time to do tonight, and it's $99 if you're a member of any real estate association. If you're not, it's $129, which is still obviously crazy cheap for an all-day workshop. And I'll talk about how to sign up for that here at the end. So creative finance, what is it? It is any kind of financing that's done on a property that is non-institutional and done person to person. There's this big thing now about crowdfunding, right? About I want to make a movie, so I'm going to crowdfund it. I'm going to get, instead of trying to go to a bank and get money for my coffee shop, I'm going to get a bunch of people to give me money to do it. We've been crowdfunding real estate deals for 1,000 years. Not with multiple people necessarily, but that idea of person to person lending, where either the seller is giving you the opportunity to pay what you owe him in payments, or whether a private lender is stepping in with his cash and saying, I will give you this money to buy this house, but my money's secured by the house, and also I get an interest rate on my money. That stuff has been going on in the real estate world forever and ever and ever. Creative finance is normally non-qualifying. Now, what does that mean? It means you don't have to go through the same set of qualifications that you do with an institutional lender. So the whole credit check, income check, even appraisals are rarely done with creative finance. That just doesn't really exist in this world, which puts you on a much more level playing field. I mean, this is, if you've ever wondered why real estate is such a popular small business, it's because the barriers to entry are a lot lower to go buy a piece of rental property than they are to go buy a Jimmy John's franchise, right? Because Jimmy John's franchise, you have to have money, have to. With real estate, if you have knowledge, if you understand how to do creative deals, you don't need to also have a great job and a lot of cash and a big down payment and years of experience and all of those sorts of things. So when you hear that loans are non-qualifying, or you hear that a particular transaction was a non-qualifying transaction in our world, what that means is you weren't run through hoops by the lender or the seller to make sure that you could, quote, qualify, because what is, quote, qualifying you is your knowledge about how to put the deal together and the fact that the lender, if you will, has a piece of real estate as security. Creative finance is much beloved because all of the terms are negotiable. Now, that's assuming that you and the other guy, and we're assuming for the purpose of this discussion that you're the buyer, you and the other guy, whether that's a seller or whether that's a private lender or a partner, if you both want to do the deal and you have motivations that are compatible, right? You can then go into this negotiating everything from price to payment to interest rate to when the payment's due, how long the loan is, whether there's a balloon or not. Everything is on the table to play with if everybody's motivated to make a deal. Now, if you have a lender who says, "Well, I'll make a deal with you at 20% interest," yeah, his motivations maybe aren't compatible with yours, depending on the situation. And there's no negotiation to be done there. And one of the important things to learn, by the way, in the creative finance world is when not to open a negotiation, when it's just not going to be a situation where you and the other person are going to be able to come to anything close to terms on a deal. Creative finance it's kind of a general term. It's like saying real estate investing. What does that mean? Real estate investing includes investing in houses, investing in apartments, investing in REITs, investing in mobile homes, which aren't even real estate, right? So it's kind of creative finance is kind of similar in that it's got subcategories that have more meaning. If I say I got an owner-held mortgage on that property, that gives you a lot clearer idea of what happened and what the paperwork was and what my position in that deal is than if I just said, yeah, I did creative finance on it. Buying subject to is another kind of creative finance, and something called a wraparound mortgage, which it's sort of similar to a subject to in that it utilizes an existing mortgage, but it's kind of rare right now. They become more common when interest rates rise after they've been low, and we haven't really had that upward consistent interest rate thing, nor apparently will be in the next couple of years. But a wraparound mortgage is something that's often used instead of a subject to in an environment like that. It also, creative finance also includes things where you don't actually get the title to the property, but you get enough control of the property to grab equity, make cash flow, and those are your lease options and your land contracts or contracts for deed. And it also includes third-party financing. So the first three that the owner-held mortgages, the subject tos, the wraps, the lease options, the land contracts, those are all types of financing that the seller carries. And then there's the whole other category that we're really not going to get into tonight, which is third-party financing, where the seller is not involved in the financing. Someone else steps in with money or credit and provides that for the deal. So that's your private lenders, your partners, folks like that. Creative finance is an acquisition strategy. I have a hard time sometimes making it clear to people that just because an acquisition strategy tends to be hooked to a particular exit strategy does not mean it always have to be that way. Okay, so an example, a non-creative finance example is short sales. When I say to people, so what do you want to do in real estate? And they say short sales. And I say, what do you want to do with those short sales? And they say, I want to do short sales. What they mean is I want to wholesale them, because what they have always heard is what you do with a property that you've talked a bank into a low price on is you wholesale it. You don't have to wholesale a short sale. Similarly, creative finance is a way of getting properties that you can then use, depending on what your exit strategy is, to make that exit strategy more profitable or smoother or whatever. So you can buy a property on a lease option, and you can sell it on a lease option, which is pretty, it's pretty typical, right? I'm doing either a lease option assignment, or I'm buying on lease option and selling on lease option, or you don't actually have to ever sell it. You could buy it on lease option and then rent it for 1,000 years if your option period allowed you to do that. So while there are certain kinds of gift wrapped all-in-one strategies that you'll hear, you really need to remember that the way you get into a property does not necessarily dictate the way you get out of the property. Creative finance is an acquisition strategy. It does not necessarily dictate the exit strategy. It is one of a number of levers that help you move deals along. Now, Matt actually kind of gave me this visual the other day that, there are certain things that if you understand them well, they help you to get something up under the deal and make it move. And I went on the internet, of course, I actually found a picture. Better marketing is a lever, right? If I'm trying to make more deals and make more money, one way to do that is get better at marketing so that more people call me. Another lever is understanding more exit strategies and being able to implement and willing to implement more exit strategies. So now I've got my marketing working. If a deal comes across my desk that's not a wholesale deal, it's just not, the seller just won't sell for that kind of price, and maybe doesn't need to because the condition of the property is good, knowing how to also retail that deal or lease option that deal or do something else with it that would allow me to make a different offer than my wholesale offer is a lever, right? Having better negotiation skills is a lever. Being able to better explain to people why they should be doing business with me is a lever. Having help is a lever. Having more people to do the work. And creative finance knowledge is a lever. Because, especially in combination with all of those other things, I've done better marketing, I've got more phone calls coming in, I know more ways to make money on a deal. Now, how do I make more of those deals that are coming across my desk work? The answer is I know how to make them work creatively, which means I can give some people more money for their properties. I can give them more money because they will let me give it to them over time. That's creative finance knowledge, and it's a really good lever to have. And it really isn't that difficult. I know you hear people, and the guru types, and I'm probably guilty of this myself, although I don't really consider myself a guru, will sometimes teach in a way or tell stories in a way that is intended not to enlighten you, but to impress you. So they throw in a bunch of jargon and they leave out a bunch of detail, and the way this story comes out sounding is somehow this guy started with a paperclip and ended up with an apartment building, and I don't really understand how it happened, but wow, I want to be just like him. And the problem is, if you're a new investor, you might think there's a lot of space between you and that deal because it was made to sound mysterious on purpose. It really isn't that tough to do this, because the leverage in understanding creative finance is leverage of time and knowledge. I know how this works. I know what needs to be done. I know what the benefits are to the other guy and how to explain them, and I'm willing to take the time to do that. Other strategies, the leverage is often money and experience. As a new investor, you probably have more time and ability to get knowledge than you have certainly experience and maybe money. So the reason that understanding and learning about creative finance is really ideal for new investors is that if you're willing to get the information, any lack you might have in the area of cash or credit or experience isn't a problem anymore. Now, I'm not saying that if you know creative finance, you're going to be able to do every deal you would ever want to do creatively. You still have to find the right people to do the deals with. But as a general statement, it's not going to stop you from buying deals that you don't have 20% down payments on everything you want to own, or cash to buy everything you want to own, or great credit, or years worth of experience. The other reason that as a newer investor, you really, really, really want to learn this is because like every investment that grows over time, the earlier you start it, the more advantage you get of it. So you can learn right now how to do creative deals, and you can buy a rental property for yourself in the next 90 days, or you can wait 5 or 10 years to do that. The difference is if you do it sooner, that's sooner that property is going to be paid off, generating a lot of income, passive income that lets you become truly financially independent. And of course, the more time you have to take advantage of that income. It's great if all your properties are paid off when you're 80, but I don't know how much time you have after that to really enjoy the fruits of all of that work. So just a quick example, and this is going to drive the engineers crazy because I'm not showing my math, but I did do a spreadsheet on this, and I know the math is accurate. Let's say that you just bought one $100,000 house creatively. Okay, you just to simplify things, because I actually did an example where you're buying one per year, and what did that look like? But just take the example here and multiply it by however many years you're going to buy houses, and you'll get a really good idea. You buy it subject to a $90,000 mortgage, so no money down, no credit, somebody else's credit got that loan. You pay the payments, okay? So you pay as agreed, you rent it out. If you buy that property when you are 50, at the age of 65, when you'd be expected to retire, you'll have about $64,000 in equity and about $2,400 a year in income from that one property. So you do the math. If you bought 20 properties instead of one at the age of 50, you'd have, what, $48,000 a year in income, and you'd have over $1 million in equity doing the same scenario with 20 different properties. However, if you do that same deal, $90,000, $100,000 house subject to a $90,000 mortgage at 4% interest, but you buy it when you're 40 instead of 50, you buy it 10 years earlier. At 65, you're going to have twice the equity. It's only 10 years earlier. You're going to have twice the equity, $122,000, and you're going to have, 3+ times the amount of income. You're going to have $8,100 a year in income when you're 65. Now, what's the difference? The difference is, if you bought it when you were 40, it's paid off when you were 65. You have no outgoing mortgage payment. If you buy it when you're 50, you still have a mortgage payment for another 5 years after you're 65. So it makes sense to do these things early, and particularly if you also have a cash strategy. If you're a retailer or a wholesaler and you can live off of the cash and kind of just let the rentals take care of themselves, to like kind of let the money accrue from any income in the bank account for reserves and for renovation and maintenance and all that sort of stuff. That is, in my mind, the perfect combination. Because if you're able to use all of the money from the rentals to take care of and pay down the rentals faster while you're working, because as a wholesaler or retailer, you're working, then the point at which you don't really have to work anymore because your rentals will keep generating income whether you buy any more or not comes a lot sooner. So you can do creative deals as a new investor. You should do creative deals as a new investor. If you're not a new investor and you're already 60 and you're going, man, she's not talking to me. Okay, the sooner the better. If the I'm 40 ship has already sailed, start at 60. It's better than starting at 70. So 6 steps that you're going to go through on every creative transaction. I'm gonna list them out for you, and I'm going to then kind of detail them out for you. So this first round will just be for you to get your notes down. Step number 1 is know what your goals are. My partner calls these limits. Like how much do I have to get in equity, or how much do I have to get in cash flow? Or there can be other kinds of limits too. What's the smallest house I'll buy? What's the oldest house I'll buy? That sort of thing. If you don't know those things going into a creative negotiation, you're going to find yourself doing something that I've had to stop some of my coaching students from doing lately, which is getting so wrapped up in the idea of how do I make a no money down deal, or how do I make 3 offers to the seller so that they can pick one, that they lose sight of what do those offers need to be in order for me to reach my goals. So understanding those is step 1. Step 2 is understanding the situation, meaning what is the seller's story? What are their plans? What's their situation? If you don't understand this, you end up doing things like offering to buy a property subject to an existing loan when the property's paid off. I've had people call me about that. Yeah, I found this great sub-2 deal. It's in a great neighborhood. It's beautiful. It doesn't need any work. And I want to buy it subject to and lease option it because they've heard that that's what you do with pretty properties. And I say, well, what is the seller? Oh, well, they don't owe anything. Okay, what are you buying it subject to? Buying it subject to what? You don't do a subject to on a property with no loan on it. Number 3 is, and this only happens after you've done the first 2 things, is you got to sit down and work out the math backwards, right? Like, what am I going to do with this property? What does that mean? What are my expenses going to be? And therefore, what does my offer need to be in terms of the math? And then the next piece is going back and explaining that to the seller in terms of the benefits. They don't care about your math. They care about what's in it for them, given their situation. Once the seller is in agreement that this would work for me as well, then you go forward in applying the strategy, whatever that is. So if it's a lease option, you're going to do one thing. If it's a subject to, you're going to do a different thing. If it's an owner-held mortgage, you're going to do a different thing. And then this is super duper important, and for whatever reason, I know what the reason is. We all have entrepreneurial ADD. That's the reason. Real estate investors aren't great at this part, and that is making sure that the deal is correctly legally documented and that everything is it's right and it's recorded where it needs to be recorded, and the people who need copies of stuff have copies of stuff, because this is not like a wholesale deal or some other kind of quick in, quick out situation. This is a long-term relationship with the seller or the lender or the bank or whatever. And over the course of 3, 5, 10 years, trust me, you're both going to have forgotten what you agreed to. And if it is not clearly documented, every single bit of it is not clearly documented, not only does that cause fights, it also makes your deal non-enforceable. You take bad documents into court and the judge can't figure out what they say, he's just going to decide what he thinks it ought to say. And that's not a situation you want to be in. Now, each of these steps sort of builds on the last one. You can't, don't come to me and say, I have this seller and he's willing to sell creatively. What document should I use? Because I don't know yet. You have to tell me, what is the situation? What is your strategy? What's the math look like? Do you want to have the title? Does it have an underlying mortgage? You literally don't know what documents to use unless you know what strategy you're applying. You don't know what strategy to apply unless you know what the price and terms are. Like what numbers do I even write down on these things? You don't know what the price and terms are until you know what the underlying situation is. And it's not like a staircase exactly. It's not I do A, B, C, D, and E. It's that everything touches everything else. So the first step of knowing your goals really has to do with your exit strategy. Like what is it that you're gonna do with the property? Are you gonna rent it forever? Are you gonna lease option it to someone for a few years and then hope they buy it? Are you gonna fix it and resell it in 60 days? Are you gonna wholesale it? Because it makes a lot of difference how long you're going to need this financing. Which strategy you pick is going to tell you to some extent the length of the financing, and you need much longer financing if you're going to rent a property than if you're going to retail it. The other part of your goals is your personal limits about like what's most important to me. I mean, to some extent your exit strategy declares that, right? If you're retailing a property and you need to be able to sell it at a profit in the next 3 months, the most important thing is price. But if you're renting it, price may not be all that important to you. It might be cash flow that's more important to you. I mean, would you overpay for a house if if you put no money down and it was going to give you $1,000 a month in cash flow? If you're getting a little older, it might be, I don't really care so much about the cash flow as I do that it pays down quickly, that I get to the point where it's paid off faster. It might be the ease of the payments. I once bought a property where we just could not agree on the price. We went round and round and round and round and round on the price on this property. And what we finally settled on was, okay, Mr. Seller, I will give you what you're looking for, but not for a year. And in the meantime, I want no payments and no interest. Because that year gave time to renovate the property and resell it, right? So with no payments and no interest for that year, it was worth the extra money to get the effect that I didn't have any cash going out during that year other than the rehab money. So, for example, and I'm actually going to give you a moment of silence here to figure this out. If your goal is to buy, fix, and resell the property, and it's a $200,000 house fixed up, and it needs $50,000 in repairs, normally under the usual formula, you'd want to pay $90,000 for this house, right? So 200 times 0.7 is 140 minus 50 is 90. 90 would be your best offer in a normal retail deal. So here's the question. Does it make sense for you to raise your offer to $140,000 at $700 a month for 200 months? So in other words, no interest financing. Everybody loves no interest financing. As a retailer, does it make sense for you to raise your offer from 90 to 140 to get the zero interest financing? And the answer is no, that's crazy. Because if you pay 140 for the property and put 50 in it, you're at 190 on a $200,000 house that you intend to sell immediately. That your entire profit potential is wrapped up in the idea of what am I making 3 months from now when I sell it. If you pay 140, the answer to what am I making in 3 months when I sell it is zero. Because by the time you've paid commissions and closing costs and all that, you're going to be upside down. Zero interest financing is good, but it's not valuable enough in this scenario to raise an offer that high. But what if your goal was to rent the property and the ARV was $200,000 and the repair costs were $50,000? Now does it make sense to go ahead and pay the seller what he wants of $140,000 at payments of $700 a month for 200 months? What do you think? Some of you are saying yes, some of you are saying no. Whenever a room is split like that, the answer is, of course, it depends. And in this case, what it depends on is how long are you going to hold it? Where are you going to get the $50,000? I mean, there's a lot of questions there, but the difference is it's possible. In this scenario, it's possible that it might be worth it to pay the $140 at $700 a month for 200 months. It would almost certainly be worth it to pay it at $350 a month for 400 months. And that's because of your goals and your exit strategy. If you're a retailer, it still doesn't make sense to pay $350 for 400 months because you're not going to keep it for 400 months. You're going to keep it for 4 months. So that is all stuff that you decide before you ever talk to a seller. The next stage is what happens when you do talk to the seller, which is you have to understand what the seller's situation is. Let's say that you're talking to a seller, and the seller, you say, so why are you selling? And the seller says, well, my house is too big, I can't do the stairs, I already rented an apartment, I want to move, but I don't feel like I can move until I sell this house, and I have to get 94 for it because I owe 92. You heard what they said, which is I have to get 94 because I owe 92. But do you hear what the real problems are here? Is the real problem that this seller needs to sell for $94,000 so that she can pay her $92,000 mortgage and her various closing costs and transfer taxes and all of that sort of thing? I would argue that the real problem is that the seller wants to move. She doesn't want to do the stairs anymore. Her knees are bad, and this next one's really in her own head, right? She doesn't feel like she can move unless the house is sold. That she doesn't have responsibility anymore for the maintenance and upkeep and the payments and all of that sort of thing. So what she said, which is I have to sell for 94, isn't actually accurate what she really has to do is get rid of the responsibilities for the property and move. And this would seem like a pretty obvious buy it subject to the existing loan type of offer if the loan terms were something you wanted to take over. Now, what if a seller said, well, I paid cash for these rentals and it was a huge mistake. I never should have become a landlord. My tenants have been driving me crazy. And I know I'm going to lose money because I put so much money in them. But my main thing is I don't want to lose too much money. There are actually sellers, and many of them, especially in this category of the frustrated landlord, who they're not trying to make money. They're not trying to see how much extra they can get. They are trying to minimize their loss. So the reason for wanting the best price they can get is not so that they can see a gain, it's so that they can minimize how much they lose. So the real problems here are not, I want X dollars. It's I want to get back as much of the money I put into these properties as I can, and I don't want to manage them anymore. So in this case, whatever your cash offer is, you can probably make him a higher offer if he'll take payments at no interest over preferably a kind of long period of time, right? In this case, a seller held loan at 0 interest with easy payment terms might be the right offer to make if these properties fit in with your exit strategy. Now, if you don't want to be a landlord, maybe that doesn't work for you. Now, what if the seller says, my daughter's getting a kidney transplant and I'm selling my house because I need the $25,000 that I have in equity to pay the deductible on her insurance for the kidney transplant, and I'm moving down to Tennessee to take care of my grandkids while this happens. Yes, I've actually gotten that call. What is the creative solution here? The answer is there isn't one, because the seller has said, and in a way that you cannot really argue with, that they need cash and they need full price. They need all of their equity out and they need it in cash. So unless you are willing to put $25,000 down to get to the seller's loan and pay full price for the house, there is no solution that you can offer. You are not the solution in this case. And don't tell me, well, maybe I can get the hospital to take payments on the $25,000. You really want to take that risk? There's probably no offer that you can make that's going to meet the needs of this particular seller. And that's one of those situations where you don't need to open up a negotiation. You can just say to the seller, your best bet, since you need full price and you need all cash, is put it on the market. Call a real estate agent. You can't make a smart offer unless you understand the situation. And I mean, understand more about it than what does the seller say he wants for the house. That's not the situation. That's the pricing. You have to ask questions about the story. Why are you selling? When do you need to sell? What's going to happen if you don't sell by then? You will never know that story if you don't ask the questions. So one of the big practices in creative financing is just talking to people and getting used to asking questions. And you'll find that for the most part, the motivated sellers are very willing to tell you anything you want to know. Anything, if you pose it as, I'm asking you these questions because I'm trying to figure out the best way to help you here, they're going to tell you more than you want to know. Now, an unmotivated seller, the seller who calls because they got your postcard and had no intention of selling, and now they've gotten your postcard, they're curious about what you paid them, they're not going to answer questions like, how much do you owe and would you let me take over your payments? Because they're not motivated. But if you'll just start getting on the phone with people with a good form, a good property or phone interview form, and just ask all the questions, it'll tell you pretty quickly who is and isn't motivated, and will give you the answers to these things that you need. So the third step of doing the math, don't open your mouth and state a specific number until you know some things. Number one, you know what you're going to do with the property, and sometimes that's more than one thing. I was talking to a student the other day who was attempting to make 3 offers on a property, I think because they had been told that that was the ideal number, not by me. And one of the 3 offers could not be made to make sense given their exit strategy on the property. So in other words, the first offer was cash, and yeah, if I get it for this price, I'll wholesale it. The third offer was a long-term financing offer, which makes sense if you are willing to hold the property for rental. But the middle offer was one that only made sense, and I'm not talking about the numbers even, I'm just talking about making the offer at all, only made sense if you were going to potentially retail the property, and they didn't want to retail the property. They don't have the knowledge to do that, nor I think the the desire. And so my question was, why are you making this middle offer? None of your exit strategies make this middle offer make sense. And the answer was, oh, well, we were told that we had to do 3 offers. That's just not that. In a lot of cases, there's only one offer that makes sense based on your exit strategy. And doing more is just an intellectual exercise. It's not, and sometimes the exercise is worth going through. Pete Fortunato, who's probably the most brilliant person in creative finance, recommends actually sitting down before you open your mouth about the numbers and brainstorming a bunch of different offers, but not presenting all of those. It's not that you're coming up with 10 potential offers and then saying to the seller, well, let's go through numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, because your civilian sellers, your folks who are not in the real estate business, just get confused by that. He recommends that you present them one at a time, starting with the simplest one. And I will often present 2 offers at the same time to a seller, but when I do that, they're both simple. It's I will do this much for cash, or I will do this much if you will carry the financing at these terms. But I don't, and you should not start talking about numbers until you've kind of begun with the end in mind. If you say to a seller, well, would you consider taking payments? Which I think that's a great thing to say. It's a great thing to say in your first conversation. Would you consider taking payments? Would you let me, if I can get closer to your asking price, would you let me pay that to you over time? That's a great question. Would you consider letting me take over your loan? That's a great question to ask in a first conversation. But if the seller says, well, how big are payments? Don't open your mouth and say a number until you have done what I'm about to tell you to do. Because once you've set a number, it's hard to back down from. Once you've said, I can give you $1,000 a month, and you discover that at $1,000 a month, you're going to be losing $500 a month, it's hard to go back to the seller and say, I meant $500. So you start with your exit strategy or strategies. Again, you might have more than one for a particular property. Work through the math backwards from where you're going to end up to where you need to start. And you also have to know what the seller's real wants and needs and situation are. You don't want to go to the seller who needs $25,000 for a kidney with the suggestion that they take $250 a month for 100 months. That's not good. So, for example, let's say that we have a rental property and it needs $5,000 in work to be really nicely rent ready. The seller doesn't owe anything, and it's worth $70,000 fixed up. What would a good creative offer on that be? House is worth 70, no underlying loan. Property needs $5,000 worth of work to be rent ready, and it'll rent for $800 a month. What would a good creative offer on that be? What is the math there? You probably need to know what the expenses are, right? So let's say that the taxes and insurance are $150 a month. And the tenant pays all their own utilities because it's a single family house. So what is the right offer in a creative situation is not necessarily about, or is not certainly not entirely about the price. It's partly about what are the terms. So the way I always start with this is I say, what's the highest monthly payment I can make? If my exit strategy is rent this property, what is the most I can offer the seller as a monthly payment? And the answer is always it depends, because your resources are going to come into play here. Remember, this property, before you can put it into service, it needs $5,000 worth of work. Where are you getting that $5,000? If you're going to need to borrow it from a private lender, you better work out what the monthly payment to that private lender is going to be, because that's an additional expense on this property. What is your limit in terms of, would you rather have high cash flow or would you rather have quick pay down? Let's assume that you have $5,000 to do the repairs with, and you want $200 a month in cash flow. Now, what monthly payment can you offer the seller? Are you doing the math? You've got a pen out. The rent's $800. Tax and insurance are $150. You want to make $200. What is the maximum monthly payment you can make this seller? And the answer is $800 minus $150 minus 20% of the $800 for maintenance and reserves and vacancy. This is the money you're socking away because you're going to end up spending it on the property. Cash flow does not equal rent minus taxes and insurance. And then subtract another $200 for you, because that's what you said you wanted to make. That allows you to make a $290 a month payment to this seller. That's the maximum monthly payment you can offer him. Is that a lower number than what you thought when I first said it's going to rent for $800 a month? Because it's the right number. See? Now, one of the things that I am always trying to impress upon people is, just because an offer is creative, just because you got in no qualifying, no money down, does not make it a good deal. If you offered $500 a month to the seller on this property, you will lose money on it every month. Okay, so most months you'll make $10. $500 is too high a payment if you are looking to make $200 a month and be able to pay all the expenses on the property and not take money out of pocket to own it. Now, for some of you, taking money out of pocket to own a property, if it would pay off faster, is not out of the question. For some of you are thinking, well, I'd actually rather just pay it off in 4 or 5 years by paying the seller money from my job. That's fine if that's what you want to do, but you have to know that that's what you are doing. So we know now that the payment under those circumstances should be $290 a month. What should the price be? Now, again, that depends on your goals. How much equity do you want to get to own a rental property? If the answer is, well, if I'm getting these really good terms, I'm happy with 20% equity, then you can't pay more than the 70 times 0.8 minus 5, which is $51,000. We now have the price. I will give you $51,000, and the terms, which is I will pay that to you as $290 a month for 176 months. Kind of writes itself, right? Once you know your goals and the seller's situation. Now, let's say that instead of renting the property, you wanted to wholesale the property. Can you pay more for a deal as a wholesaler if the seller is willing to finance? And the answer is actually, yeah, you can, because if the seller is willing to finance, that means you can finance the deal to your buyer. So if I wanted to wholesale this property, the way I do the math is I would say, for $70,000 fixed up, I would think that a typical landlord would be very willing to buy a property with owner financing and get 25% equity. So I'm going to multiply it by 0.75. I'm going to subtract the repair costs. So what I'm going to sell it for is $47,500. That's what I'm going to sell it for. But I got to make some money here, so I'm going to subtract $7,000 for myself, or $7,500 for myself, and offer the seller $40,000 at $290 a month for 138 months. It's a different offer if my exit strategy is different. And then what am I going to do with this? I'm going to sell it for $47,500 with $7,500 down and payments that are higher than $290 a month. I'm going to sell it at a higher payment because I'm going to charge interest and I'm not getting charged interest. And you're starting to see now that understanding how to do a subject to doesn't really matter until you understand what's leading up to it. Everything touches everything else. Your goals in the seller situation determine the math. The seller situation determines what benefits you're going to explain to the seller. The strategy, in other words, am I doing a lease option or a subject to? The benefits depend on the strategy, right? And the paperwork certainly depends on the strategy. So it's all sort of a spider web, but it's not a very big spider web. It's 6 things that you need to get a grasp on. But if you only have a grasp on one of them, you're not going to be able to do this. You can be the world's best negotiator and you can get the seller to say, sure, I'll take $100 a month for 100,000 years. But if you don't know how to document that, you didn't make a deal. You can understand every implication of buying a property on a lease with option to buy, and if you can't explain the benefits of that to the seller, you're never going to do a deal. You can't do any of this stuff unless you can do all of it. Good thing all of it is only 6 things. So the 4th step would be explain the benefits. Sellers don't do these deals because they're good for you. Sellers do these deals because they're good for the seller. They see that this in some way answers their real need, and the only reason they see it is because you explained it. You're not gonna say to a seller, well, here's my suggestion. I would suggest that I lease option this property from you for $500 a month. And the seller didn't understand what you just said. You have to be able to explain what the benefits are, and this is where it can be an iterative process. And let me show you an example of what I mean. This is a house that I bought a little over a year ago. A little over a year ago? No, it was a little under a year ago. It's a great house. I mean, it's the perfect house that every move-up home buyer wants to live in, or a first-time home buyer wants to live in. It's a 6-room, 3-bedroom. It's got a finished basement, 2.5 baths, 2-car garage. It's relatively new. It was built in '96. It was actually in really good shape. It needed carpet in some of the rooms, and the landscaping was just sort of looking worn out and overly basic. And it's worth about $135,000. So this kind of property in this price range in the market right now is typically moving pretty fast, especially if you would carpet and landscape it. It's the kind of property that you're going to get several offers on in the first few days that you have it up on the market. This owner was selling because she needed to downsize. She actually built the house in '96, so she'd been there for almost 20 years. She was getting older. Her knees didn't really allow her to do the stairs very well, and since her bedroom was on the second floor and her washer and dryer were in the basement, that was becoming a real problem with her. She actually had listed the house for 3 months and unfortunately listed it for an over market price. She listed it for $140 without doing any work to it, and she was very frustrated because nobody wanted to buy her house. That was what she said, is nobody wants to buy my house. So when she called, she said, I just let it go for $118,000. And you don't have to really even do the ARV times 0.7 minus repair cost thing to realize that $118,000 is probably not that number. It's probably 135 times 0.7 minus repairs is almost certainly less than 118, even if you went to public school like me. But she did say that she had a loan that only had 11 years left to run at $810 a month. And that was very interesting to me because one of my big goals these days is to pay off my rentals as fast as possible. And when you tell me that you only have 11 years left on a 30-year loan, that tells me two things. Number one, I don't have that many more payments to go before it's paid off. And number two, the line, the amortization line, like how much interest am I paying and how much principal am I paying, have crossed. So of that $810 a month, if I've only got 11 years left on the loan, a lot of that's going toward principal. A lot of that's pay down. It's not the expense of interest. So I like it when somebody tells me they've got an 11-year loan. So my plan was, I'm going to buy this house, I'm going to put in the carpet, and I'm going to rent it for $1,100 a month. It won't cash flow much because $810 is the principal, interest, tax, and insurance payment, but I would still have the maintenance, $220 a month for maintenance and whatnot. So not a lot of cash flow. However, I'd have a free and clear rental in a nice neighborhood, good school system in 11 years. So my thought was, I don't mind paying her a little extra money over, over the amount of her loan to get this deal. So ARV times 0.7 minus repairs is $102,000. She only owes, she reported, I think she owed 95 or something, 92, 95, something like that. So I don't mind putting some money down on that deal. I mean, I'm getting it cheap and also with financing. So I called her back and I said, listen, I don't think we can do $118,000. This was before I even saw the property. I said, it sounds like your house is in really good shape, but that's just too much for a house that I'm only going to be able to rent for $1,100 a month, and that I'm going to need to put carpet in first. What I could do for you is I could give you enough money to put the first month's rent and the deposit up on your apartment, get moved, and I could do it quickly. But if I'm going to do that, I'm going to need to take over your loan. I'll give you the difference between what I can pay you and your loan, but at that point I got to take over your loan. And because it just makes it easier for me to pay this higher amount of money. That way I don't have to go get my own loan, which, by the way, would take 45 to 60 days, and I know you want to move. So I know this isn't quite what you were looking for, but the good thing is I can close as fast as we can get a title search done. Longest it would take would be 2 weeks. So in 2 weeks, I mean, you can basically get your stuff packed and you can be gone in 2 weeks, which means you can get out of there, and as of the next month's payment, I will be making the payments. And she said, well, that sounds pretty good. Can you come over and we can sit down and you can explain it to me more? And I said, yeah, absolutely. Let's do it. So I went over to her house. I looked around. It was exactly what she reported. It was not bad at all. But then the situation got iterative, because when we sat down at her little dining room table and pulled out her mortgage documents, it turned out that she had refinanced the property 2 years ago. And this is going to happen to you more often than you would guess, that a seller is just wrong about the terms of their loan. Actually, that happened to me twice last year. This exact same scenario where I was told it was in this case, an 11-year loan, in another case, a 17-year loan, turned out to be a 27-year loan instead. They just forgot that they refied. So she had refinanced the property, making it a 28-year loan, not an 11-year loan. Now, I'm willing to only make $90 a month on a rental for 11 years and have it be paid off, but I'm not willing to do that for 28 years. So what that did was it changed my exit strategy. I no longer was interested in holding it for a long-term rental. I figured the thing to do was probably lease it with an option to buy to someone else. Now, that didn't change my entrance strategy. I still wanted to buy it subject to the existing loan because that loan is like 3.85%. But now the benefit, there was no, that benefit of quick pay down wasn't there anymore. The only benefit was the equity. So I said, Miss, I don't remember her name, Smith, I thought that this only had 11 more years, and it has 28 more years, and I can't do what I said before with 28 more years left to run. What I can still do is I can just take over your payments. I can pay all your closing costs. You won't have to pay anything, and we can still close in 2 weeks. I don't know if that's going to work for you, but at least you'll get to move and you won't have to pay anything to sell your house. And she said, okay, well, do you have a contract for me to sign? Yeah, this was one of the ones where I was pretty sure she was going to say no when I had to change the offer because she had given me the wrong information. Don't feel bad about having to change your offer when somebody gives you the wrong information. So what we did was we closed this deal in mid-September of last year. We lease optioned it, $120,000 as is. So basically letting the buyer pay for the carpet and the landscaping. The buyer gave us a $2,200 option fee and is paying $1,100 a month rent. And I am going to have to get up and move my computer because I am getting a low battery message. And this plug that I am plugged into is apparently not working. So I will keep talking as I move my computer. Okay. So when the tenant buys this property in October, now we actually gave them 2 years to buy it, but they were super qualified. They walked in with an FHA qualification from a mortgage broker that said that they were only going to have to wait about 9 more months. They had some piece of old credit that had to get older. But when they buy it in October, which is their plan, we'll have gotten the $2,200 option fee, $3,600 a month in net rent. So the difference between what they're paying and what I've been paying every month. And the profit on the sale will be $26,000. So that's a $31,000 profit. That's not bad. I'm looking forward to that day in October when I walk away from that closing with another $26,000 check. It no longer worked as a rental deal, but it worked just fine as a lease option because the difference being I was now looking at the equity as being the big benefit instead of the quick payoff. So steps 5 and 6. This is the implement the strategy and document the deal steps. This is where the more strategies you know, the more deals you can do, but also the more confusing it gets. Because most of the creative strategies, the owner-held mortgages, subject tos, lease options, basically look the same in that there is some sort of down payment. Now, sometimes that down payment is zero, And in the case of a lease option, it's called an option fee. In the case of an owner-held mortgage, it's called a down payment. They're called different things. But there's usually a line on the document that says this much will be paid up front, even if that number is zero. There's usually a monthly payment. It might be rent, it might be a principal and interest payment, it might be a principal, interest, taxes, and insurance payment. There's always an overall price somewhere in the document. There's always a thing that says, I will be paying you this much money. And sometimes there's an interest rate, right? There's not in lease options, and there's not in most owner-held mortgages, at least not as I do them. But in land contracts and subject tos, there's usually an interest rate. So the question gets to be, why would I choose one over another? Why do I need to know more than one? And once I know more than one, why would I pick one over another? I've got a great example. This is another deal I did last year that is really, really similar to the one I just showed you. The seller bought this house. This is in for those of you who are in Cincinnati, this is in Forest Hill Schools. It's out in Anderson Township, which is a really good school system for those of you who are not from Cincinnati. The seller bought this house in February of 2014. When he bought it, it was a rehab. Somebody had bought it from a bank, completely renovated it. It was beautiful inside. Nothing needed to be done. He paid $88,000. He put $22,000 down and got a bank loan. So he had a $66,000 loan, which was, interestingly, because you don't see a lot of these anymore, it was what's called a 3-1 ARM, which means it's an adjustable rate mortgage where for the first 3 years the payment remains the same, but then after that it's adjustable. It can adjust every year, and it can adjust up to 2% per year. So if it starts at, say, 5%, in year 4 it could go up to 7, in year 5 it could go up to 9, and in year 5 it could go up to 11% interest, because there's usually a cap of 6 total points on the interest rate. And as you can imagine, those kinds of loans are kind of scary if you plan to hold a property long term. Because I know I can make it cash flow at the current interest rate, but can I make it cash flow at 11%? I don't know. The other little detail here was that he had this loan with a bank that only had one branch. They did not sell their loans to Fannie Mae. They knew all of their borrowers, and it has been my experience in having done dozens and dozens of subject to deals that is the bank that's going to call the loan due. That is the bank that's going to enforce the due on sale clause, is the bank that has one branch. Matilda in the back's job is to collect all the checks every month and put them in the computer by hand, and she's going to notice when the check doesn't come from Donald. I mean, she's going to call when the check doesn't come from Donald. So the current monthly payment was right at $500 principal, interest, tax, and insurance, but that could go up significantly after the 3rd year. So this is the kind of deal that you have to look at and say, do I really want to buy this subject to this loan? Do I really want to buy this subject to a loan that can adjust upwards, that the bank is likely to notice and care that I took it over? And if I'm not going to buy it subject to, in what other way could I accomplish my goal without actually taking the title to the property? So the rest of the story, the seller, so he bought this property in February. In November, he got transferred to Columbus, and he did not want or need the house anymore. He was coming back every weekend to check on it, which is weirdly paranoid given that this is kind of a good neighborhood. But seriously, he was spending every weekend at the house. And he called me and told me the story. And I said, look, the thing is, you just paid $88 for it. The chances that I'm going to be able to pay you more than $66 are pretty slim. And even at $66, I'm going to want to make payments. This was not a three offer type of deal. Because given the condition of the house, given my exit strategy, the only offer that really made sense was, let me take over your payments. So I, in this case, did a lease with option to buy with this seller. My price was, and yes, you can do this, in the option agreement, it didn't say my price is $66,000. It said my price is whatever your loan payoff is at the moment at which I exercise my option. So yeah, my price is $66,000 today, but it's going to drop every month over time. The term of the lease and the option was 2 years and 4 months. Why 2 years and 4 months? Because that's how long it was until his next interest rate adjustment. And while I fully expected to have the house sold before the rate adjusted, I did not want to lock myself into having to pay the new payment when it came due. So I said, the term is going to be 2 years and 4 months. At that point, we will know what the new payment is. I have unlimited renewals. So I can renew it every year for 1 more year, and that's unilateral. I get to decide whether or not I'm renewing. And my rent to you, Mr. Seller, will be whatever the principal, interest, tax, and insurance payment is at that time. So in other words, if I like the new PITI payment, I'll renew the lease for a year and the option for a year, and I'll pay it. If I don't like it, you can have your house back. What I tried to do with this house was the same thing that I was doing with the other one. I tried to lease option it to a buyer at $90,000 with payments of $1,050 a month. I got a buyer who qualified. And he's put a big amount of money down too. He's put like $12,000 down. And he qualified on Friday morning at 9 o'clock. We called him and said, hey, good news, you're getting the house. And on Friday morning at 3, he called and said, I talked to my bank and they said I'm qualified to just buy this house, so I just want to do that instead. So the whole thing failed in that he just paid cash for the house. That wasn't my intention. My intention was to lease option, but he paid cash. And I made $18,000 by the time the dust settled and the expenses were paid. But the important thing about this story is those deals kind of look the same. They were both no money up front, I'm just going to take over your loan at the current payment kind of deals. But the implications of those two deals in terms of legal aspects, how much control I have, how much control the seller retains, what the tax implications are, what happens if I don't pay, they're very, very different between those two deals. If I stopped making the payments on Miss Smith's deal that I bought subject to the existing loan, what would happen? What can Miss Smith do about that? The answer is, unless I have set up some other stuff that we'll talk about on July the 30th, unless I've set up some other stuff, what's going to happen is Miss Smith is going into foreclosure. Her credit will be ruined. I will be named in the suit, but not as a borrower, just as a title holder, so it will do nothing to my credit whatsoever. I love it when I hear people say, well, if I don't make her payment, she can just foreclose on me. What? How can she foreclose on you? She doesn't have standing to foreclose on you. She can sue you because you said you were going to make the payments and now you're not making the payments. But the bank is going to continue the foreclosure while you are not making the payments unless she picks them up and makes them. Now, in the case of the lease option deal, what would have happened if I hadn't made my monthly rent payment to the seller? Very different implication, right? I'm just a renter. When I lease option a property, I'm just a renter. So he can evict me like he can evict any other renter. It's a 30 to 45 day process in Ohio. He'd have his property back. It would be a lot simpler and less likely to cause him any problems. if I want to get out of the subject to deal, if I later on up the road say, you know what, I just don't like this house, I don't like this deal, I want to give it back, as it were. What has to happen in order for me to, quote, give it back? This is another thing I've heard. Well, if it turns out later that the deal doesn't work out, just give it back. You can't just give it back. There's this concept in real estate called acceptance. And in order to, quote, just give it back, the seller has to accept the deed back. And if the seller says, no, I'm not taking it back, you agree. It's your deed. You agree to pay the payments. You're going to make the payments. I mean, you can sign the deed over to them and you can record the deed, but if they sue you to put the deed back in your name, they're going to win. I've seen this happen, trust me. So basically, in a subject to deal, you better be pretty darn sure you want to own that property for the long term. In a lease option deal, if you want to get out, you just wait until your lease expires and you don't renew it. So lease options give you a lot less kind of responsibility and a lot more freedom to leave the deal with no consequences, but they also give you a lot less control. What documents would I be signing with the subject to seller? What disclosures would I give them? I would give them a written disclosure that said things like, you don't own this house anymore, I'm buying it. You don't have any rights to any of the tax benefits, any insurance proceeds. You don't have the right to any income from the property. Your loan has a due on sale clause, which you just violated. If the bank comes after me, this is what's going to happen. If you declare bankruptcy, this is going to happen. And then we need to sign a deed at the closing, right? What about the lease option deal? What do I have to sign there? Well, there's a lot less disclosure. And what I would sign would be a lease and an option to buy, and I recorded the option to buy because this was such a long-term option. I didn't want him to be able to go sell the property to somebody else because he forgot that he was agreeing to sell it to me because it had been 5 years. So it's that sort of thing. It's that sort of compare and contrast in detail, and what is a lease option really do versus what does a land contract really do versus what do you say to somebody when you want to do subject to and they don't want to give you the deed and now you're converting over to a land contract. That's why you need to come to the all-day class on July 30th. It's going to give you the confidence to go out there and start talking to people about deals and to know that you know what you're talking about, to know that you're applying the right strategy to the right situation, that you're doing the math right, that you know what to offer. We're gonna talk about multiple offers, but it's gonna be in a very no BS kind of way. There are times when it just does not make sense to make multiple offers. If you have one exit strategy and that exit strategy requires that you get such and such a financing or such and such a price, you don't need to go through some intellectual exercise to make 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 offers. You might again brainstorm 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 different ways you can do it, but you're going to come down to there's just one offer that makes sense. We're going to talk about some negotiation strategies, and these are going to be ones that are you don't have to be real slick to do it. Do you ever get the feeling that there's some folks out there who, when they negotiate, it's like they've got a fine layer of slime on them because everything is I'm only telling you half the truth, or I'm telling you something in such a way that I know you're going to mistranslate it and I'm not going to correct you, but I didn't actually say the thing that I know that you're going to mistranslate. You don't want to be like that. These negotiations, because again, they turn out to be long-term relationships with people. It needs to be no BS, no hiding stuff, no obfuscation, no, just flat out, hey, here's what I'm thinking, tell me why this wouldn't work for you kind of negotiation. And when you know these techniques and you apply them, this is where you make your millions. This is where you get all that equity and all that cash flow and all that passive income and all that, equity that you can turn into cash. It is great, great stuff. If you go to the website, you're going to see it's $129 for one person or $159 for two. If you are a member of Cincinnati RIA or Co-RE, and if you're not, it's $159 for one and $189 for two. If you register by July 31st, so that's next Thursday, you get $30 off. So if you're a member of any real estate association, you can go for $99 for one person or $129 for two. If you're not a member, it's still $129 and $159. If you register by July 21st, RIA is paying for your lunch. If you register by Monday at midnight, I am going to give you an extra bonus. And yes, if you've already registered, you're going to get this, don't worry. I am going to give you an extra bonus that's going to help you out a lot going forward in making these deals. It's called the 12 Killer Seller Negotiation Tactics ebook. And it's a little about 30-page book that I wrote about how you deal with the human part of this, how you deal with getting the story and helping people, helping your sellers in particular, to understand what it is that they really need. Because what they say they need, which is always cash, right? And what they really need, which is maybe debt relief or somebody to move quickly or something like that, are often different things. So the ebook talks about things like why it is that sellers have such a hard time with this, how you can help them along in the process of understanding what it is they need as opposed to what they think should happen, how to negotiate without being slimy, 4 factors that are going to tell you whether or not to even open a negotiation. You got 4 hurdles to cross before you even start talking to a seller about low price or financed offers. And 3 things that in a negotiation that you may have heard people say. I have heard people say these things that if you do them, I will hunt you down and kill you, because they are so slimy, they are so douchey that it's just wrong. And do they work some of the time? Yeah. Do they blow your rapport out of the water? Absolutely. So I'm going to share some things to absolutely not do there as well. You can buy this separately for $79, or you can get it for free by signing up for the all-day Buying Without Banks workshop. If you are a member of Cincinnati RIA or you are not a member of any real estate association, you're going to sign up at www.cincinnatiria.com. Unfortunately, they do not have a way, they don't have like Co-RE members and other group members in their database. So if you go there as a member of Co-RE or CIRIA or something and try and sign up, it's going to charge you the higher price. So if you are a Co-RE member or the member of another RIA, sign up at www.centralohioria.com. So CincinnatiRIA.com if you're Cincinnati or not a member of any group, and CentralOhioRIA.com if you're a member of Co-RE or a group that's not Cincinnati. If you have any questions about this, give Christy a call during business hours, please, at 513-471-5008. That's 513-471-5008. This is a pretty killer deal to get an all-day workshop on one of the most powerful levers you can have in the real estate business for $99. I mean, obviously the only reason that's happening is because Cincinnati RIA is a nonprofit organization. If they were a promoter, you'd be paying $300 for this for sure. And also get the 12 Killer Negotiation Secrets ebook. And, I'll give you my personal money back guarantee on this, that if you stay all day and you walk away feeling like you didn't get all the information I could pack into your head, and you didn't get more confidence and more knowledge about how to go out and do this, I'll return your money. But get signed up by Monday at midnight to get the free ebook. And with that, we're going to wrap up the evening. I appreciate you guys sticking with me for so long. I know it's a late night for many of us, but Do appreciate you coming. Hope you learned a lot, and I look forward to seeing you on July 30th in Cincinnati.